I made a video a few months back about 10 movies with esoteric messages. Many of the commenters there asked me for my thoughts on horror movies with occult aesthetics. There were 2 horror movies in that list already, and you can be sure that they are my 2 favourite horror movies, namely Midsummer and A Dark Song. You can go and check that video out to find out my thoughts about those 2 films. But today I'd like to have a look at 10 more horror movies which the occultist usually is expected to have seen, whether they bear any resemblance to reality or not. If you make it until the end of the video, I've added an additional movie which should have made it onto my other video about 10 movies with esoteric messages. If you're interested what that might be, stick around. Let's kick off with number 10. The Kill List is an amazing British movie from 2011, which starts off as a hitman movie and then transforms into something very, very dark. It's a very emotional movie, a very raw movie, one that feels incredibly real. I love the way this story is set up as this hyper-real criminal story, and then the carpet's just pulled out from under your feet and you're in this world of hexes and curses, and it's fascinating, really very gripping, very involving, and it's easy to get lost in it. Next up, in number 9, we've got the 1968 horror classic Rosemarys Baby, in which Mia Farrow plays a young woman who's gaslighted into becoming the surrogate mother to the devil's child. The film's still quite effective in the thrills that it produces, even though the premise is definitely far-fetched and really has a lot more to do with bringing in thrill-thirsty viewers than it has explaining anything to do with actual occult practice. In the 8th position is another Roman Polanski movie, which everyone clearly wanted to see on my other list. But again, while it's a very nice film, very thrilling, it has nothing actually to teach about esoteric practice, other than the fact that occultists usually really like nice, rare books. The film follows the progress of a rare book dealer who's made an arrangement with a rare books collector to find some missing versions of a book that may or may not give one infernal powers. Next, in 7th place, we have the critically acclaimed movie The Witch, directed by Robert Eggers, and in my view it's a very relevant film in that it depicts the 17th century Puritan anguishes about witches and the evil that naturally comes out of so much paranoia. The final scene in which, well, without spoiling, a self-fulfilling prophecy comes to a shocking natural conclusion is one of the most heart-rending endings that I can remember. In the 6th position is a 2018 remake of a 1977 classic. Suspiria grabbed and kept my attention for the full 2.5 hours that it lasted, thanks in part to Tom Yorke's haunting soundtrack. It's a film that I like to revisit quite regularly. There's a lot to like here, but there are 2 main aspects of the film that I think are extraordinary. Firstly is the way it shows the shamanic nature of dance. This dance company is really just a front for a witch's coven, and the dances that they perform have ritualistic qualities that affect the outside world. Now, of course, while the effects themselves are depicted in a rather grotesque way for our entertainment, I'd say that the whole theory does have its roots in truth. Another aspect of the film that I really respect is the final scene in which we see a hideous bloodbath, but it's depicted with a surprising amount of love and ultimately catharsis. I guess, of course, the music has a lot to do with how that final scene is experienced as well. In the 5th position, we've got The Wicker Man. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the 2006 fiasco. I'm talking about the original 1973 classic with Edward Woodward and the inimitable Christopher Lee. The film has aged quite a bit, especially if you compare it with some of the films that it's inspired a few decades later, such as Midsummer, which I've already mentioned. But what's especially interesting for me in this film is the suffocating depiction of rural England, or insular Scotland in this particular case, the smiling facade and the willingness to take lives in the pursuit of low magic. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suspecting for one second that this is a common practice. However, when we look at the evidence of rural magic around the world, such as the Bibliothèque Bleue grimoires, for example, it becomes evident that when survival depends so directly on the forces of nature, humans will go to surprising lengths to appease those forces. Next, in fourth position, we've got a film that might not be considered a horror movie, but it certainly does have all the trappings of the occult. The 1986 movie The Name of the Rose by director Jean-Jacques Hano, based on the book by Umberto Eco, is a great detective story happening in a Benedictine monastery in the early 14th century. What I particularly like about this film is the way knowledge is shown to be repressed in the name of some pious, restrictive order, which of course speaks much more to the neuroses of the guardians of the faith than it does to the actual faith which they profess to be guarding. And that comes across really clearly in the film, which happens to still be very entertaining. In third place, I'll have to place a category of films, and those are the exorcism films, based on quote-unquote real-life exorcisms. Chief among these, of course, would be The Exorcist, but also of note would be the films depicting the exorcisms performed by the Warrens, so the Amityville Horror and The Conjuring Parts 1 and 2. While it's difficult to know really what to make of these films, the second part at least of The Conjuring was based on events that happened very close to where my sister lives in London, and getting first-hand accounts of people saying that yes, well, they remember very well the time when all of this was going down in the newspapers. It's kind of disconcerting and certainly food for thought. In second position, we've got the 1978 classic The Devil Rides Out, based on the 1934 novel by Dennis Wheatley, in which an occult specialist, played by Christopher Lee, infiltrates a satanic cult in order to save a friend's soul. I particularly like the fact that many authentic practices are depicted here. There are plenty of theatricals, of course, but the character played by Christopher Lee clearly knows what he's doing. I can't think of any other film in which a Solomonic circle is actually depicted and used. The demon summoned also acts in ways that you'd expect a demon to act, attempting to trick the conjurer into stepping out of the circle, and the way in which the characters experience the final outcome rings quite true as well. Finally, in first position is the first film by Midsommar director Ari Aster. Hereditary was a thoroughly disturbing movie that plays very heavily on naturally human fears, and what really hooked me here was that while the action depicted is clearly quite theatrical, there are little details just here and there that tell you that Ari Aster really knows what he's talking about. Tiny little details such as, well, the name Paimon, for example, which is one of the Goetic kings of hell. He's not depicted at all in the way that the Lemegeton depicts him, but nevertheless, the name is accurate. Also, at one point, the camera enters a bedroom and the bed's foot is standing in the middle of a white triangle that's painted on the floor. And that is a Solomonic device designed to keep a demon constrained during evocation. And finally, the widespread devastating effects of evoking these demons for selfish purposes or for reinforcing the ego are depicted very theatrically, of course, and maybe grotesquely, but in a way that is symbolically accurate. So there we have it, 10 films in addition to Midsommar and A Dark Song, which really are my two very favourite horror movies for all the reasons I've already mentioned. But I promised you another movie. And this is a horror movie, however, it's not explicitly got anything to do with the occult. However, the subtext, when you realize what you're watching, could not have anything more to do with occult practice than it does. And that is Jordan Peele's Us. I admit I was devastated when I first saw the film and then watched many reviews and realized that nobody had really understood the subtext, which is, these are our shadows. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about shadow work. The parts of us that are rejected, that are suppressed, end up working against us. And the shadow work of becoming aware and of owning that shadow is a very core practice of the occultist. If you've seen that film and were perplexed in any way about what was going on, don't hesitate to leave a comment, and also don't hesitate to revisit it with this new knowledge. You might enjoy it a lot more. So that's all from me this week. Thanks ever so much, as always, for watching until the end. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up. It really helps the channel, and to subscribe if you haven't already. Take care of yourselves, of each other, and see you very soon with another video.